I was lying in the hospital bed, having recently undergone a coronary angiography. My chest felt as though a lump of iron had been dropped on it. My phone rang and my son Eric sent me an SMS message. He reminded me that my mortgage is $1,500 this month and that I should send it to my account by the 10th. I was so dizzy that I nearly dropped the phone and was unable to stand. He did not even inquire about my well-being, he simply requested money. My youngster is draining me like a freaking leech. Should I continue to keep him in my life? I am so tired of living in this manner. I had recently completed a series of tests, and the hospital room was smelling of disinfectant. My body felt empty. The words on my phone screen were icy and sharp like a knife. My mother and I are just starting out, and the financial burden is immense. Could you kindly assist us for 3 years? We will certainly repay you once we are on our feet. This was the duet that Eric and his wife Vanessa sang while they were attempting to win me over. They had recently acquired a new house, and they were facing a $1,500 monthly mortgage payment. The initial concept was straightforward. I would cover them for 3 years. I have spent all of my savings to keep afloat, and my monthly pension is just $2,000, and their mortgage is crushing me. I have covertly accepted a part-time job with a janitorial business, where I am mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, and doing everything else they ask of me. I have not told anyone as I feel too humiliated. What type of boy have I raised? His mother is in the hospital and he won't even pick up the phone. He only cares about reminding me to make the payment. Why am I doing this, Vanessa? I used to use honeyed phrases liberally. Anna, you are the best mother in the world. Eric is your son. If you do not assist him, who will? We will reimburse you. We guarantee that we will repay me at this rate. I will not survive to see the day. My grip on the phone intensified until I nearly shattered it. My fingertips became numb. A rush of nausea hit me. I turned my head and took deep breaths. Shortly after the door creaked open, Eric and Vanessa had finally managed to squeeze in a visit. Vanessa held a small plastic bag of apples that appeared to have been untouched. She groaned as soon as she entered the grocery store, where the parking was exorbitant at $5 for a half hour. Eric approached the bed and extended a greeting. "Hey, Mom, are you feeling better?" Before I could respond, he turned and inquired, "Have you prepared the mortgage money? Don't let it be late." Vanessa immediately responded, "Yes, Anna. We are also experiencing financial difficulties. Caleb's early learning program has recently increased their fees." She then hesitated and added, "However, your insurance should cover the majority of this." The correct translation is, "Pay your own damn bills. Don't even think about asking us for help." I looked at them both and my heart just sank. Vanessa kept going, "Anna, you really need to recover quickly. We're so busy with work and Caleb needs me at home. We just can't be at the hospital all the time." The message was received and no care or company was expected. Just get well soon so I can continue to act as their walking ATM. Eric chimed in, "Mother Vanessa." Vanessa's eyes scanned the bedside table as if she were searching for a hidden stash of emergency cash, but she meant well. "She truly cares about you, and please don't forget the mortgage." Eric, on the other hand, remained glued to his phone, barely pretending to listen. Despite the fact that most people visit family in the hospital to bring warmth, they came to check if the ATM was still functional. Diane, the girl next door whom I had assisted years ago, arrived shortly after they had departed. She refers to me as her godmother, but in reality, she is more like a family member than anyone by blood. She brought a thermos containing homemade chicken soup. Anna inquired about my well-being, and Diane gently poured the soup into my mouth, feeding me one spoonful at a time. She then wrapped a blanket around me and assisted me in lying down. She even went to the nurse's station to inquire about my care instructions. Upon her return, she took one look at me and said, "I am feeling much better." I sensed that something was amiss, Anna. "Did Eric cause you any more distress?" I suppressed a smile, assuring her that I was in good health and that she should not be concerned about me. Diane sighed softly, but refrained from inquiring about Eric and Vanessa, as she had always been aware of their personalities. It was not her place to do so. "Anna, you must speak up if Eric is transgressing the boundaries. You cannot continue to do so." I patted her hand, telling her that I was simply growing older and that my body was failing me. She was young, and it was difficult for her to deal with, but I felt as though I had swallowed a mouthful of glass in that steaming bowl. Compared to those limp apples and even colder words, the chicken soup left me with a bitter, aching mess of emotions. It was a cruel twist, as my own blood saw right through me while someone with no relation worried about whether I had eaten. The doctor suggested that I stay a few more days for observation, but I insisted on being discharged when I considered the hospital bill, which was racking up thousands, and Eric's cold, detached tone. Eric claimed that he was overworked, and Vanessa stated that there was no one to watch Caleb. Neither of them had any intention of watching Caleb. In the end, Diane was the one who took a day off from school to come and retrieve me. Upon entering the house, the kitchen was ice cold, with no signs of cooking or warmth. The entire space was as empty as a hospital room, with not a single call from Eric or Vanessa, not even a text to inquire about my well-being. In a way, the silence was a blessing, as I could take care of myself. However, the hollow sensation akin to a needle pricking the softest part of my chest was difficult to shake. I ran my hand along the cold surface of the counter and opened the fridge, where a few wilted leaves of lettuce were present. Vanessa arrived unannounced with Caleb in her arms. The little boy was bouncing with energy, his cheeks rosy, and there was no trace of illness in sight. Vanessa walked in and immediately burst into tears. "Anna, Caleb had a severe fever a few days ago, and we had to visit the doctor twice. The cost was exorbitant. Could you please lend us $500 to get by?" Vanessa dabbed at the corners of her eyes, but no actual tears fell. The doctor advised that Caleb required the best medication. I clenched my teeth and pulled out $500, handing it to Vanessa. Vanessa's face lit up the moment the money touched her fingers, and she rushed out with Caleb. She didn't even stay long enough for a glass of water. I wouldn't just stand by and watch my own grandson suffer, would you? I looked at Caleb's bright, healthy little face, and my heart softened. After all, he was my grandson. The small pension I had just received was supposed to cover the mortgage. The satisfaction I felt when she pocketed the money was obvious, yet I still swallowed it. This was my sole source of income for the month. Now that I had given her the money, what about the mortgage? Was I expected to continue begging them? I was no longer a mother. I was a walking, talking checkbook. As a result of the $500, I missed the payment deadline. The bank contacted Eric directly, and he called me immediately after. When I picked up the phone, he exploded, asking, "Mom, why hasn't the year I received a call from the bank? Are you intending to abandon us at this time?" It sounded as though he had consumed a pyrotechnic. Vanessa intervened from the background, her voice strident and piercing. "Anna, what are you attempting to accomplish? This could severely damage our credit score." Then, as if it were not enough, she included my late mother-in-law in the situation. Eric's grandmother used to say, "A genuine mother prioritizes her son." I was trembling so badly that I could barely speak, and I was shaking so hard that I could barely speak. "You know exactly where that $500 went, and you have the audacity to use the dead to guilt-trip me." "I will get it covered soon." I rasped out my voice to a whisper after hanging up, and my hands were trembling so badly that I couldn't even hold a cup of water. My heart clenched again, and I stared at the photo of my late mother-in-law, Helen, that was hanging on the wall. Bitterness rose in my throat as I realized that I had spent my life raising a son who had turned out like this, and he still believes that I haven't sacrificed enough. I swallowed my pride and made my way to see Frank Delaney, an old colleague from the hospital. He resided in one of those pre-war apartment buildings with narrow stairwells and steep climbs. By the time I reached his floor, I was nearly gasping for air. When I explained my situation, he paused, his expression flickering between pity and disbelief. Despite this, he lent me the money. However, there was a peculiar tone in his voice. "Anna, your son is nearly 40 years old. Why are you still the one?" I was able to barely keep my eyes open as the sunlight outside Frank's house was so harsh that I could barely keep my eyes open. Neighbors stood chatting in pairs and trios across the street, their voices low, but I could feel their words like tiny knives. Didn't she retire? Why is she still borrowing money? She is old and still being taken advantage of by her son. Mortgage, don't you think it's time you lived for yourself? I forced a smile, knowing that this was just an unexpected bump that would not happen again. I was feeling like a walking joke in the name of motherhood. I had all but stripped myself bare, and the last shred of dignity was wearing thin. However, I thought I might be able to get a few days of peace once I scraped together enough to cover the mortgage. A few days later, I made a fresh batch of orange marmalade and planned to drop it off at Eric's. The moment I stepped through the door, Vanessa rushed over, practically glowing. "Anna, we just saw the most amazing house." She was waving her phone. She waved a baton, presenting me with images and floor plans of the top neighborhood, which is only 5 minutes from Lakeview Elementary. Her eyes were filled with ambition, not joy. The price of the house was so high that it would break your heart, and they had no money for the down payment. Immediately, she turned to me with her familiar, calculated charm. "Your old place is kind of small and outdated, Anna. Why not sell it to help us out with the down payment?" she smiled. Eric responded, "Yes, Mom, it's really for Caleb. You're always alone anyway." The chill I felt then wasn't from the air conditioner. It was from their words. That little house they were so eager to toss aside was the only home I'd ever made with my late husband. The one thing in my life that still felt untouched was mine. Now they wanted to uproot me, squeeze out the last of my value, and call it care. They truly desired a live-in babysitter who would not require payment. Vanessa pressed her phone closer to her face as she flipped through glossy real estate photos, gushing about the lighting, open layout, and resale value. She was not even attempting to conceal the greed that was evident on her face. However, I was not observing the house. Rather, I was envisioning my own. I was envisioning the curtains I had sewn by hand, the rug I had purchased on clearance and vacuumed every Sunday, and the creaky wooden chair that I refused to discard because it still held my husband's back. To them, it was all just square footage and equity. I refrained from expressing my thoughts. Yes, it was not immediately apparent, and that did not sit well with them. They began to visit more frequently, always for conversation, but the subject matter was consistently the same. One day, they even brought a trunk full of groceries. Vanessa's voice was dripping with sugar, and she suggested that we have a nice family dinner tonight. I was aware of the important matter, which was the same old pitch to sell the house over dinner. They alternated between discussing Caleb's future and guilt, like tag team wrestlers. "If you are not amenable to this, we can discuss it further." Vanessa shrugged and said, "Agree or forget about seeing your grandson." I was unable to eat a single bite, as my chest felt like it was full of wet cement. I remained silent. Vanessa leaned forward with a smile glued to her face. Anna said, "Just think of it as doing this for Caleb. He's your grandson. If you don't help now, he'll grow up resenting you." Eric jumped in without even looking at me. "Mother, stop being so stubborn. That old house isn't worth much anymore. Let's get something newer." This was not about family. It was a shakedown, and they were using Caleb as leverage. Vanessa dropped a piece of chicken breast into my bowl with the appearance of caring, while simultaneously spewing guilt like poison. Eric barely looked up, only nodding when Vanessa needed a backup singer. There was no warmth at that table, only strategy. The wine they poured me did not taste like love. It tasted like control. The stress had been building for weeks, and that night it finally broke me. The pain was so intense that it took my breath away. Emergency doctors diagnosed me with acute gastritis. I was severely dehydrated, vomiting, and unable to stand. I was lying in bed, dizzy and hollowed out. I was able to call Eric, who heard my frail voice and replied flatly, "I have clients to meet this week. I'll have Vanessa check on you." The moment he hung up, something inside me cracked. Hours later, Vanessa appeared. She wrinkled her nose and wondered, "Oh my God, what is that odor?" I briefly considered that the home inspector may have reconsidered her stance. Subsequently, she sat at the edge of my bed and spoke in a light, airy voice. "Anna, it's time to start making arrangements. You're not as strong as you used to be." She was beaming, but her gaze was drawn to my desk drawer. I recognized the items she was seeking, the deed and the old passbook. She then asked a casual question that was as smooth as silk. "Oh, and by the way, where do you keep that old savings account?" Is the password still your birthday? You really shouldn't be handling this stuff all on your own. She paused, but I heard her message clearly. Make a will and sign it over to us. I gazed at her face with eager anticipation, and my heart grew cold. She was not present to assist. Rather, she was there to inventory the assets. My body felt heavier by the minute, but my soul had already gone numb from the bed. I could hear her in the kitchen clinking dishes with the confidence of an owner. The drawer was still open, and the papers inside were rumpled from her fingers. She returned with a smile and explained that she had to leave for Caleb's art class. I nodded, but I did not intervene once she closed the drawer. After closing the door behind her, I stood and proceeded to the drawer. I meticulously returned each document to its proper position. Upon touching the deed, my palms trembled. The edges were slightly creased, indicating that it had been handled by someone else. I gazed at the line that read, Owner Anna Mitchell. They were not anticipating my recovery. Rather, they were anticipating my complete loss of control. I was unable to sleep for a single wink that night, as my stomach was akin to being scraped raw with a wire brush and my diarrhea would not cease. Even the act of standing to drink water required all of my strength. I had to drag myself out of bed, my slippers damp and flimsy, and kneel in the bathroom to clean up the mess on the floor. Cold water seeped from my wrists all the way to my chest. I sat on the toilet, staring at the stain I had not been able to clean, and my mind wandered to over a decade ago, when my husband was hospitalized and bleeding out in the middle of the night. I had knelt on the sterile floor, wiping up the blood with tissues, and then hauled a half-full bucket to wash him up and change the sheets. I never considered it to be too dirty or exhausting. I simply did it. However, a bout of gastritis left me feeling like a burden and a drain. How did I end up in this situation? Just as the sky began to lighten, I finally sat down for a moment of rest. That was the moment the doorbell rang, and it was Diane. She was standing there holding a paper bag containing breakfast. Her brows furrowed as she saw me, and she immediately approached me. I tugged at my collar, attempting to conceal the pall in my face. It was nothing. I had ingested something unsavory yesterday. She did not say anything. 5 minutes later, she emerged from my bedroom carrying a few papers, including my prescriptions and insurance forms. She did not cry. She simply let out a sigh and asked, "What have they done to push you?" This far? I did not respond. Instead, I removed the papers from her hand and placed them in a drawer. She sat in the living room while I forced down a few bites of breakfast, her eyes quietly watching me. "I know you don't want to be harsh with them," she finally said, pulling a business card from her purse and placing it on the coffee table. "Her name is Melanie, and she is a lawyer who specializes in elder asset protection." I glanced down at the card. The text was neat, and there were no letters out of place. "I'm not trying to sue them," I said automatically. Diane replied calmly, "No one said you had to. This is about protecting what is yours from being taken from under you." I said nothing, as last night, while I was nearly passing out from pain, none of them inquired about my medication or water intake. However, they quickly circled around my passwords and paperwork like vultures. I stared at the card for an extended period of time, wondering if this lawyer could truly protect me. I inquired if she could assist me in establishing a trust, to which Diane replied without hesitation, "Yes, your house and pension are both included." Eric and Vanessa arrived that evening, bringing flowers and a performance. Vanessa entered the room with a bright smile, asking if Anna was feeling any better. She drifted into the kitchen, chatting as she moved, and requested assistance with tidying up. Additionally, I had grabbed a pharmacy card for her. The other day, I heard her footsteps hovering near the drawer where I kept my documents. My stomach twisted into a tight knot, and Eric slumped down onto the couch. "Hey, Mom, any chance you can still cover the mortgage this month? You mentioned not feeling well last time, and well, things are pretty tight for us." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked into the bedroom and returned with a folded insurance statement. I checked with Diane, and I have to pay out of pocket first. Vanessa reappeared from the study with an unreadable face. They remained for a few more minutes before departing without eating. After the door closed behind them, I walked over to the table. My folder had been relocated, and the deed that I had tucked at the very bottom was now directly on top. The cover of my insurance file bore fresh creases. I gazed at the stack of paper for a good 30 seconds before turning and returning to the sofa. I picked up my phone and called Diane. I spoke in a steady and low voice, expressing my desire to meet the lawyer you mentioned as soon as possible. Diane was waiting for me in the car, and the morning sun was gentle and warm. I wrapped myself in a coat and pulled a hat low over my head, resembling someone who was heading to the grocery store. However, we were not headed to the store. Rather, we were headed downtown to an old office building with no flashy signage, only a small brass plaque by team. She was seated behind a neat desk, donning a slender outfit. Her expression was composed. She was not the aggressive, fast-talking type of lawyer, but rather a soft-spoken, measured individual. You are here to safeguard your home, assets, and the right to make decisions for yourself. I nodded, my heart racing. She then proceeded to explain that we must establish 3 things: a revocable trust in which all of your possessions will be transferred, a healthcare proxy that ensures that decisions are made by a trusted individual in the event of a medical emergency, and a disinheritance clause that explicitly states that your son and daughter-in-law will not receive any inheritance from your estate. She stated it clearly, and I comprehended every word. She also mentioned that they would be prohibited from touching any fragrance once this document is signed, even if they were to become incapable of speaking for themselves. Melanie responded by sliding a pen across the desk. You just have to make sure they never get to hijack your life again. I bit my lip and looked at Diane. She did not attempt to persuade me. She simply gave a quiet nod. I did not stop. I transferred the house, retirement account, and every bank account I could remember into the new account. However, my hand trembled as I signed. I designated Diane as the secondary trustee, as I was the only one who knew the password to the new account. I requested that Melanie include a clause stating that beneficiaries are prohibited from transferring or reassigning inheritance shares unless they are personally amended in writing by the trustee. She nodded and said, "You are thinking clearly." As we were departing, she presented me with a duplicate of the documents. She clarified that the purpose of this was not to terrorize them. Rather, it was to serve as a reminder to ensure that no details are overlooked. I immediately changed the locks upon my arrival at home, and I was able to locate a locksmith who completed the task in just 30 minutes. I then gave Diane the sole spare key. Subsequently, I closed the old savings account and opened a new one online with dual passwords and fingerprint authentication, disabling all automatic family transfer features. I deposited my prescriptions in a locked cabinet and concealed the key behind an old oil bottle in the kitchen corner. Once everything was in order, I was able to proceed. I brewed a cup of tea in the same old house, which was covered in worn carpet and peeling paint. Newspapers were neatly stacked, but for the first time, I realized that it belonged to me and only me. At dusk, the doorbell rang, and it was them. Eric was holding Caleb with a smile, while Vanessa was carrying a pot of soup. Anna and I had just arrived from work in the vicinity, and we decided to stop by. Vanessa spoke in a breezy tone as if nothing had occurred. I had even prepared your favorite chicken soup. I smiled and welcomed them in, offering them tea and playing the gracious host. Vanessa gazed around, her eyes glinting. The windowsill workstation, which was previously situated over the dining table, has finally been relocated to the drawer adjacent to my sofa. Please allow me to tidy up for you, Mother. She chirped before she could take a step, as there were so many letters piled up here. I responded, That's fine, and there's no need for you to worry. I've already sorted it. Her smile wavered. Oh, I believe I observed something earlier, something about trust. I offered her a composed smile. Yes, it was a simple arrangement I had made in case I unexpectedly left. I did not wish to burden anyone. Eric placed his teacup on the table, his expression altering. What does this mean exactly? I have no idea. Vanessa briefly lost her composure, but she quickly regained it. Anna, please refrain from acting in such a manner. We have come to visit you. I nodded and sat down, ensuring that Caleb did not touch my belongings. The ear turned stone. They remained for less than 10 minutes before Vanessa announced that Caleb was becoming restless, and they departed. I escorted them to the door, watched them descend the stairs, and quietly closed it behind them. I then returned to the kitchen and collected my belongings. The evening news murmured from the old TV as I continued to chop vegetables. The sunlight fell across the sink, and I knew at that moment that I had finally done the right thing. Back at home, Vanessa exploded and threw Eric's coat onto the couch. You were sitting there sipping tea, and she had already moved everything into a trust. You were still playing the beautiful sun. Eric shut the door behind him and his brow furrowed. Could you not scream in the hallway? The neighbors could hear Vanessa. Eric was left speechless as he removed his coat and sank into the couch, realizing that his mother was not merely emotional. She had cut them out from the beginning. She never raised her voice. She only said, "Don't touch my things." I had even had the design plans drawn up, but he now understood that this was a boundary, and she had never established one in all these years. The following day, he arrived at my house alone without Vanessa. He did not make a call in advance, he simply showed up. He shifted uncomfortably at the door, expressing his desire to converse. I opened the door and stepped aside to allow him in. This time, he was quiet, sitting on the edge of the couch. He did not rush into anything, and after a lengthy pause, he finally spoke. I remained silent and poured him a glass of warm water, setting it gently in front of him. "Do you remember when I had chickenpox as a child?" Eric's smile was frozen as he opened his mouth to speak, "But I remember that you stayed home with me for 2 weeks and even called off your night shifts at the hospital. I still remember the vegetable soup you made." I nodded, and I remember that he gave a small, nervous smile. "I know Vanessa can come off harsh, but that's just how she is, and I know I've made mistakes too. We never intended to hurt you. We've just been under a lot of pressure." I sat down slowly and looked at him. My voice was steady. "Did you know that the last time she visited, she went through my things?" Eric's smile froze as he opened his mouth to speak. I closed the door once more, assuming that she had not noticed that I had entered. However, I observed her flipping through my property deed 3 times, and she even studied the markings on the back of the folder. His head dropped, causing the water in his glass to rip slightly. I let out a quiet sigh. "Eric, when you were a child, I stayed up all night, exchanging cold towels on your forehead. After you grew up, I have bailed you out more times than I can recall. I am capable of enduring poverty, exhaustion, and even unappreciation. However, I will not sit back and smile while you are being treated unfairly. I have placed the house in a trust, and I have stated that you will not be inheriting a fragrance after I am gone. It will be donated to the local women's shelter fund. You all drain me empty," and he did not say a word. There was no wrath in my voice, nor was there any sorrow, only clarity. Eric stood up stiffly as if in response to the final kindness of a mother who had roused him. Consequently, this is a form of revenge. I also stood, gazing into his eyes. This is protection. The following day, I received a call from a friend from church. Her voice was hushed, and she stated that your daughter-in-law has been contacting some of our old friends. She suggested that your mental state may be unstable, and she did not respond. She suggested that the family may need to intervene. I remained silent as she inquired whether you have been forgetting things, if you can still cook for yourself, and if anyone has been checking in on you. She had made her move not through the will, not with a lawyer. She was coming for my sanity. I ended the call and immediately dialed Melanie. I expressed the need to include a guardianship exemption and a legal trigger in the event that anyone spreads claims about my mental state. I want the right to sue. Melanie paused on the other end before asking, "Have they started?" I responded that they were already on their way, and then I made a second call to Diane, requesting that she investigate Vanessa's situation. I have been contacting individuals, including church members, preschool members, and neighbors. I am not waiting to be accused. They will be the ones scrambling. Sunday mornings at church were always quiet, and I was leaned on my cane as I entered the community room behind the main sanctuary. It was the weekly women's group gathering, and I had not attended in years. Upon my arrival, everyone was ecstatic. One woman offered me her seat, another inquired about my well-being, and someone even handed me a cup of lemon tea that was exactly to my liking. I nodded and smiled. I was able to converse easily until the topic of property taxes arose. I casually stated, "Oh, that house. I am donating it to the local women's shelter. I believe it is better to provide a roof over the heads of women who have nowhere else to go than to leave it to anyone in particular." A few of them were momentarily taken aback, but they smiled and nodded. "Anna, you have always had vision," one of them said warmly. I added, "The trusts are already in place. Anyone who thinks they can claim it later is mistaken." This elicited a round of laughter. I beamed as well, but I was aware that the news would reach Vanessa in no more than 3 hours. As it turned out, Vanessa dashed through my front door less than an hour after I arrived home. "Anna, what are you doing?" she shrieked, slamming her hand on the table. Eric followed, pale as a specter. "Are you insane? You are donating the entire house." I laid down the knife I was holding and gazed at them with a composed expression, muttering, "Well, you've all been behaving as though I were deceased." Vanessa stamped her foot in anger, inquiring about the fate of her son, Caleb. I wiped my hands and said, "Caleb, the last time you took my retirement money, you claimed it was for his fever medication. Meanwhile, he was bouncing on the neighbor's trampoline all afternoon." "You are being unfair, Mom," Eric said, his visage turning stone frigid. I snapped, tossing a copy of the property deed onto the table. "Did you consider fairness when you were sneaking into my drawer to steal documents?" Vanessa lunged for the paper, but Diane stepped out of the hallway holding up her phone. I recorded everything she said calmly, saying, "Don't worry, every word you just said can be played back in court." Eric froze, and I walked over, standing between them. My voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "From this moment forward, you are not welcome in my home. I have changed the locks and the trust is with me." I gave a cold laugh and said, "Go ahead. I'd love to bring the unpaid loan records, the surveillance footage of you rifling through my drawers, and this audio recording into court. Let's see who should be scared." Her mouth opened but no sound came out. Eric kept his eyes on the floor. I shoved them out the front door and shut it hard behind them. They were still yelling outside. I turned the lock back in the kitchen and the soup was still simmering. I picked up the knife, swept the chopped vegetables into the pot, and stirred as if nothing had happened. However, I knew that this time they were truly out of options. Vanessa did not knock again. However, on the third night the phone rang. It was Eric's mother, and his voice was soft and his tone was cautious as if I might hang up at any moment. I did not say anything. I simply listened. "Caleb had been inquiring about you, and he expressed his confusion about why you no longer call or pick him up. I informed him that you were busy, but in reality we were truly in dire need of communication. Vanessa's behavior was excessively aggressive. However, she is not a malicious individual as she is a mother. Eric is a child and he is innocent." While he was speaking, I silently synced the call to Diane using my Bluetooth recorder. After he finished, I responded with a single word, "I remember what you said in my house that day." I recorded it. There was a pause, and I assured him that I was not threatening him. I simply inquired whether there was anything we could do. There was no response, and I hung up. The following morning, my attorney, Melanie, issued a formal cease and desist letter to both Vanessa and Eric regarding the matter. The following line reads, "Notice of legal action regarding the ongoing endeavor to control the estate of the senior. I made my first public statement about it at the subsequent church meeting. I did not mention any names, but I basically declared that I had placed my house in irrevocable trust because I was tired of being treated like a walking ATM while still alive." The body provided specific instances of audio descriptions and document copies. It declared a complete termination of their medical power of attorney and emergency contact powers. It warned of urgent legal ramifications for any further interference or slander. While some individuals applauded, others maintained their silence, while a few others moved their chairs closer and murmured, "I am experiencing the same thing." I did not intend to be admired. I simply had had enough. On Friday, I personally visited Caleb's school and met with the dean. I informed him that I would no longer be his emergency contact and would not be responsible for his tuition, medical expenses, or any other expenses. He has parents, and it is now their responsibility to take charge. The dean was perplexed, but eventually nodded in agreement. "Thank you for being forthright." Vanessa was in the parking lot when I exited the school. She appeared pale, clutching her phone, and stared at me in a state of bewilderment. She opened her mouth, and I halted 2 steps away, gazing into her eyes. I bid her farewell, but I did not linger, and I departed without looking back. That evening, upon my return home, I discovered 2 notices affixed to the front door. One was a formal confirmation of my property contribution to the Women's Center, while the other was a description of the trust modification in my own handwriting. The house will be renamed Helen Place, a sanctuary for women in need, after my passing. I carefully selected the name as Helen was my mother-in-law, and for years they used her memory to make me feel guilty. Now her name would be remembered in places where they would never be allowed to go. A few days later, one of my neighbors informed me that Eric had been discreetly relocated at work. The new HR director, who appeared to be the younger sister of one of his college friends, had heard of his attempts to persuade his elderly mother. He no longer managed the same clients' accounts, and Vanessa had been chiseled out in church. A couple of people approached me and murmured, "She used to say you were mentally unstable, but now everyone knows you're the most level-headed person here." Diane assisted me in packing up the photo albums, removing the old calendar board from the fridge, and picking the final rose from the garden. I did not cry on the day of our move, and I did not look back. The new abode was a simple 1-bedroom flat that had been set up by the previous owner. However, the Women's Center was flooded with sunlight. A wicker chair was situated by the window, and I sat there with a cup of tea, observing the neighborhood children ride their cycles in the breeze. This time, I was not anticipating a tap on the door, as I now understood that the door was only open for certain individuals.